Bring back the monk. Yes, let's do a video on the monk today. So I'm just doing my sound check, making sure everything is working all right, and once I know that the sound's coming through and the video's working fine, I'll get started. Been requested. I've done videos on monks before, but apparently this has been a bit confusing for people, so I'm going to cover it again. Here we go. Alright, so sound check is coming through fine, that's good. Now if you're looking for the start time for this video, you'll find the start time is down in the description once YouTube publishes it and I get a chance to tack in the time. If you haven't been part of my live streams before, normally what I do is I present everything first, and then once I've presented everything, then I open it up to questions near the end, which I will do because I know there will be some questions to be asked. I have compiled a lot of information from Sage Advice for those of you who might find that useful. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for that. Sound check is 5 by 5 or 5 out of 5. Great, excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Let's get started. I don't want to talk for too long, otherwise I'll probably lose my voice, and we don't want that, do we? Okay, so let's get going. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about the monk. Let's talk about Dungeons and Dragons 5e and the monk's unarmed strike. Now, for those of you who are unaware, I am a fan of the monk, so I do enjoy talking about the monk, and if you turn to page 78 of the Player's Handbook, you'll find information on the monk's unarmed strike. I'm going to read out the section. I'm then going to break it down and give you some sort of pointers. I'm going to pull up a map after that and I'm going to show you and demonstrate the process, get out the whiteboard and the black marker and do some number crunching with you, essentially show you exactly how it works. And then at the end of that, I'm going to discuss all of the Sage Advice stuff that I have compiled for those of you who really need the nitty-gritty, all the little finer points with regard to the monk's unarmed strike. So let's start off with martial arts. Essentially, this is where it all begins. At first level, your practice of martial arts gives you mastery of combat styles that use unarmed strikes. Now, these unarmed strikes can be with your head, your hands, your fists, your feet, your knees, literally any part of your body that might be able to be used as a weapon. So don't think of it just as fists and feet. It can be any part. So that's any combat style, and it also includes monk weapons. So it's not just your unarmed strikes, but monk weapons, which are short swords and any simple melee weapon that you don't have. You need to make sure these weapons aren't two-handed or have the heavy property, because if they are two-handed or have the heavy property, then martial arts doesn't work quite the way you might want it to. You gain the following benefits while you are unarmed and not wielding or wielding only a monk weapon. So we're going to only be focusing on the unarmed side of things, but I'm going to go through it anyway. And you got to make sure you're not wearing armor and you're not wielding a shield. So you can't go, I'm going to punch and have a shield for this to work. So here are the key features to understand. You can use your dexterity instead of your strength for the attack and the damage rolls of your unarmed strikes and monk weapons. So if it's an unarmed strike or a monk weapon, you can use dexterity or strength, which other classes can't do, with your attack rolls and your damage rolls. At level 1, and this changes, but to start off with, you can roll a d4 or 4-sided dice in place of the normal damage of your unarmed strike or monk weapon. Now normally most classes get to add 1 plus whatever their strength modifier is, and that's it. Or, you know, those sorts of restrictions mean that you really can't do an awful lot of damage with an unarmed strike. But a monk is different. This die changes, or dice changes, as you gain monk levels, as shown on the martial arts column of the monk table. And I'm going to go over that in a second. Now there is another section that's part of martial arts, which I will talk very briefly about, but I won't go into today, because I feel like that's another video. When you use the attack action, so you have to use the attack action with an unarmed strike or a monk weapon on your turn, you can make one unarmed strike as a bonus action. So that does mean that if you are level 1, you can use your action to make an attack, and you can also use your bonus action to make another unarmed strike. So you can punch twice or kick twice or headbutt twice or whatever it is that you want to do. Essentially, it's just to represent the fact that you are using all the parts of your bodies. And then you could describe it as, I use a headbutt and a punch, or an elbow and a kick, however you like. It really doesn't matter. Now, the example they give is, for example, if you take the attack action and attack with a quarterstaff, you can also make an unarmed strike as a bonus action, assuming you haven't already taken a bonus action this turn. So you only get to do the bonus action once, which is pretty straightforward. So now let's open it up and have a look at my little scene here, because I've set up, I took a little bit of time to sort of make sure it was nice and close and easy to follow and understand. And I'm going to go through the basics for our monk and how it works. So the first thing I want to say is, when you build your character and you have a look at your character sheet, you're going to find there's a couple of things you need to understand, and that is, if your strength modifier or strength score, it doesn't matter whether it's the score or the modifier, because if your strength score is quite low, it probably means that your modifier is quite low. If your dexterity score or modifier is higher than your strength, then it is smarter to use your dexterity modifier, which means building a monk around dexterity is usually a better idea than building it around strength, because you don't have to spread around your points, or particularly if you're not rolling dice and you're building a character with the standard array or the point buy system. So I would suggest, remember, you get to use either dexterity or strength. So go with the one that has the highest modifier. In this case, for this particular example, this monk that is facing off against a brown bear has a strength score of 14, which means the modifier is +2, and a dexterity score of 16 with a modifier of +3. And what we do when we make our attack roll is we're going to take that modifier and add it to our proficiency bonus. And we're only going to deal with a level 1 monk. I think that's the easiest way to deal with things right now. So your proficiency bonus at level 1 is only 2. So if we go dexterity modifier of 3, and then we add 2, we're going to get 5. It's pretty simple. That's not too hard. It's easy enough. So that 5 is what we add to our attack roll. And as I said, we are going to use our dexterity modifier for doing our attack. We'll use our dexterity because that's the highest thing. So grab your 20-sided dice, roll that dice. I rolled a 14, and then I add 14 to my attack modifier, which is 5. So 14 plus 5 equals 19. Okay, 19. There it is. Now 19 is equal to or greater than the armor class of our bear. The bear or brown bear only has an armor class of 11 and a range of hit points. It doesn't really matter, but the point is you've hit your target. Now, as I said before, if you make an attack with your action, you can follow up with your bonus action, which I'm not going to do right this very second. Instead, we're going to roll our damage. Now, as I said before, we're going to use a 4-sided dice. That's a D4 for our damage. So what are we going to add to that? We're going to add our dexterity modifier. We're using dexterity for the attack roll. We need to use our dexterity modifier for the damage. So that is a +3. So take your 4-sided dice, roll that. I rolled a 2, and I add 3 to that. So 2 plus 3 equals 5. And that is our damage. And so the first strike on the bear, when you get close enough that is going to cause 5 bludgeoning. Because usually when you're doing an unarmed strike, it's bludgeoning damage. Okay, so now that that's covered, what if I wanted to do another attack? Which I can do if I want. Particularly, it's level 1, it doesn't matter. Now, other classes can't use their bonus action to make an unarmed strike, but the monk can. So this is where things get a little bit more interesting, because it actually stipulates as part of martial arts. So I'm going to grab our dice and we'll make another attack. Now you can do so, as I said, when you do this, you need to roll your 20-sided dice. We're going to add 5 to that. So I rolled a 19. So 19 plus our 5 for our attack modifier. Okay, and that's going to come to 24. All right, so there's that. Now 24 is more than enough to be equal to or greater than the armor class of the bear, which has only got 11, so it hits. So let's roll some damage, just as we did before. And we roll our 4-sided dice. We're going to add 3 to that. So I rolled a 4 on the dice. So 4 plus 3 is going to equal a grand total of 7. So 7 damage. And that's the second attack done with your bonus action. And that's really how your unarmed strike works. So what happens as I level up with my monk? Because the damage dice that you get to use for unarmed strikes changes, right? So when you're level 1, you're going to get like just a 4-sided dice. But as you go up and you get to level 5 monk, you get to use the 6-sided dice instead. And when you get to level 11 as a monk, you get to use the 8-sided dice. Remember, it's not character levels, it's monk levels. And when you get to level 17, you get to pull out the big mother, which is the 10-sided dice, the D10. So it means that your attacks get more powerful as you increase in levels. Really, really helpful. I certainly think that is a great feature of the monk, because it does sort of level up the damage that you do. And not only that, as you go up in levels, you will also get the opportunity to make vastly more than just 2 attacks. One is your action and one is your bonus action. That's because of a feature of extra attack that the monk will pick up. And on top of that, you can also use your flurry of blows, which I won't cover today because that's a bit more complicated. So let's go and start chatting just really quickly about some of the information regarding sage advice and what you might be able to sort of expect from that. I have, I spent, I wouldn't say a huge amount of time, but I spent enough time to sort of make it clear that there were a couple of questions that people were asking. So this is all taken from Jeremy Crawford. So I haven't taken it from Mike Merles, it's all Jeremy Crawford. So here are the couple of questions that I'll answer. A beast's natural weapons don't count as unarmed strikes. That's like the bite or the claw from the bear. They're not actually considered unarmed strikes. They are just considered natural weapons. Does that make sense? I know a lot of people get confused because they might want to sort of mix their wild shape with the druid, along with, say, picking up the monk and, you know, multi-classing into monk and druid. This is often why that particular question is asked. What about the monk's unarmed strike? It doesn't count as a finesse weapon. Even though you get to choose whether you use dexterity or you use strength for your attacks and your damage, your monk's unarmed strike still doesn't count as a finesse weapon, even though you are using dexterity or strength for your unarmed strikes, depending on which you pick up. The monk's unarmed strike is not, it's a weapon attack, but it's not counted as a weapon as you would use, say, like a sword or an axe. The monk's unarmed strike can't be used with the rogue's sneak attack. Now the reason being is because to use sneak attack, you must have a weapon. And when I say a weapon, it needs to be something that is suitable for being classified as a finesse weapon. And as I just said, unarmed strikes don't classify as being a finesse weapon. It needs to be a finesse weapon to be able to use something like the monk's unarmed strike. Can't be used with sneak attack, the rogue's sneak attack. So if you're going to multi-class into monk and rogue and you thought you could do that, unfortunately not. The monk's unarmed strike can't be used to divine smite. Sorry. The monk's unarmed strike can be used for divine smite with the paladin class. So if you go monk and paladin and you've got divine smite accessible and you want to use your monk's unarmed strike to make an attack and then try to use your smites as well, you can. So that's definitely an option. A monk's unarmed strike can't be used with the spell Hunter's Mark. So if you decide to multi-class again and you want to use your unarmed strike and use Hunter's Mark, the spell in conjunction with that, unfortunately you can't. It's just sort of how it's worded. So a lot of the rules are, there's a lot of general rules and there's very specific rules, and this is why it has that sort of restriction. So that's all I have to say on the Monk's Unarmed Strike, and hopefully I've covered all the areas that people wanted me to answer. Hopefully I've made it really clear, and if I had, please share and like the video. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos, which I do quite often. If you want to support my channel, you did so by watching this video. I have hundreds more, plenty on the Monk and other classes for players and for Dungeon Masters. And look, I don't do Patreon, but I do have an affiliate link to the book depository and Amazon where you can buy stuff online. I get a small commission. You pay exactly the same price. That helps support me as well, doing more videos. There is a video on the Monk called, it's a combat tutorial. You can see the live version. You can see the edited down version. It's really up to you. Now, this is your opportunity to ask questions. Is there something that wasn't clear? Have you got something you would like to add? Do you feel that I got something wrong? Would you like to just say hi? That's all possible in the live chat right now. But if you're not part of the live chat, fortunately, we have a comment section. Just leave it down in the comment section. And that's it. Hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, I'm not gone. I am just switching back over to the scene of the map, and then we'll go through the live chat and cover any questions, because it seems that for whatever reason, finding a pre-made character sheet that didn't have errors in it, that was a Monk, was quite difficult. And although a lot of people sort of got confused by that concept, the video wasn't wrong. It's just that there was an error on the character sheet, and that's, I think, why people got a bit confused when I was covering Unarmed Strikes. Okay, I already said hi to Eric. Thank you for doing the sound check for me and making sure that everything was working fine. Hi, Frankie. How's it going? It's 2 a.m. here, so I'll see how long I last. Mate, you can always watch it later on. It's not a problem. Okay, first off, Eric, a buckler. There aren't bucklers in the player's handbook. There's a shield, but if you have a look in the player's handbook, there's no such thing as a buckler. So having a buckler won't change anything. Bucklers were applied when you were playing things like Dungeons and Dragons 3.5. There were sort of special rules around how you can make attacks when you had a buckler, and it was slightly different to when you were using a full-blown shield. But that's why there is no buckler to not, so you don't have to create that problem. And even so, I think you'll find that the buckler is still classified as a type of shield. Okay, what's that, Eric? Beer or beer? Well, what do you mean? Beer? No, it's not the drinking beer. We're talking about the beer in terms of the beer that goes arr, that beer. Gotta love the Kiwi accent. Do you know, I find it amusing because everybody's got an accent. Eric, everybody's got an accent. Pronunciation. Now, here's the thing. Tomato and tomato. Tomato and tomato, which is right? Depending on where you are in the world, it's correct or wrong, right? So, I just like to point that out. Okay, what else have we got here? Thirsty Steve. Do you allow other weapons not covered in the player's handbook to be used as a monk weapon, like nunchucks, for example? Well, I don't really bring in additional weapons. What I tend to do is we look at what are the monk weapons and say, okay, what is suitable and close enough to that it can fulfill that role. And no, yeah, the thumbnail was not a lie, dear Jesus, you're absolutely right. I produced a beer, didn't I? So when you're looking at equipment in terms of weapons and sort of working your way through there, deciding on what is going to sort of sit in a particular area, simple weapons, right? So is there a simple weapon that you could classify as being a nunchuck? What you've got to understand that the nunchucks is simply a rice flail. The nunchuck was used in many years ago back off a little island off Japan by farmers who used it to smash and beat rice stalks to get the rice off it, and they didn't have any metal weapons, and so they used that particular rice flail to attack people with because they had nothing else. The concept of having a chain between the two sticks only came in later on. Usually it was just a piece of rope because you couldn't have metal back then. So hopefully that sort of covers your question in terms of the nunchuck. And yeah, all I would do is I'd just take a weapon that is close enough to the sort of damage output of another weapon, keep the same sort of basic features, and just call it a flail. Hi Paul, how's it going? I would love to make a temple that trains monks to use unarmed strikes that deal slashing or piercing damage. I can call it the House of Vorpal Hands. Nice. I thought you said his monk was attacking the bear. It is a bear. Yeah. I don't know what your point is, Eric. When I said, you know, the sound that you make in New Zealand when you pronounce bear and beer, it's the same. It's just spelt differently. There's nothing else to it. I'm not sure why you're caught up on that. Okay. Or are you just playing with me? Dear Jesus, does unarmed strike work with Warlock Hex spell? Now, I did have a look at that, and I don't actually know the answer. And with bonus action attack action. So look, your unarmed strike, as I said, you can use your action to make an unarmed strike, and part of the rules, martial arts that the monk has, states that you can use your bonus action to make another attack. Okay, you make another attack, and it's an unarmed strike. Now you don't have to. You can use for your unarmed strike that you make with your bonus action. It could be a monk weapon. You can mix and match as long as it's an unarmed strike or a monk weapon. You can mix and match. That's not an issue. So no hassles whatsoever. As for the hex spell, in conjunction with something like unarmed strike, I would have to do a bit more research. I did have a look. I couldn't find anything on it that was clear. There was too many sort of deviations from an answer that made sense, which happens sometimes. Thrifty Steve, how's it going? Maybe nunchucks would be like two clubs, simple weapons connected by a chain or rope. Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could call it like that. You might classify it as simply something like a quarterstaff, and simply shuffle the damage output on both ends. But you've got to understand, with a nunchuck, you're only using one end. So you could use the club. That would be perfectly fine, because even though you're swinging the weapon and you might be changing which end you're holding, you never strike anybody with both ends of the nunchuck at the same time. So that's the only thing to sort of point out, is that, yeah, something like a club would be perfectly fine. And you don't have to, it doesn't have to be two clubs, unless of course you're wanting to have your monk hold two clubs in each hand, and you're wanting to make your attacks, you know, your action and your bonus action, and get those benefits. But weapons are going to be very, very useless to you when you get to a certain point in terms of your progress as a monk. Most weapons that you're using are going to be doing maybe 1 to 4 points of damage, so it's a D4, and then a 6-sided dice, and then maybe you'll get up to an 8 if you're lucky, depending on how things are working, but it's usually not the case. And in fact, you're better off at a certain point to actually stick with your unarmed strike, because you don't have to worry about fluffing around, moving from moving one weapon out and moving another weapon in. And as a general rule, most simple weapons only go as high as a D6. So to get as soon as you get to a D8 or D10 or an 8-sided dice or a 10-sided dice, you're better off to stick with those as damage output. Unless, of course, you prefer the flavour. Dolphus, how's it going? And by the way, you're welcome, Steve. Why go unarmed, or did I miss it? Well, we're only going unarmed because at a certain point your weapons aren't really going to do as much damage. As soon as you get to a D8 or a D10, you're better off to just go unarmed and forget about weapons. Okay, have I answered? Oh, there's another question. Hi Paul, nunchucks might be a simple weapon. Yep. they could be a weapon that is, you know, something that is only used by a monk, which tends to be the case. They require a lot of training to use properly without, well, as I know, because I've been involved in the martial arts, and I've hurt myself in the groin many times in other places, swinging those things around. So unless you know what you're doing and how to stop things from bouncing off or swinging them into locations you don't want to swing them into, so it might be just a specialized weapon that only a monk uses. But the style or training uses would be, yeah, martial arts. It's a martial weapon, probably only ever used by a monk. I don't think it's not. You've got to understand that something like the nunchuck is a particularly difficult piece of equipment to use. You wouldn't use it unless you had no other choice, or you just wanted to look cool. It's actually a very difficult tool to use. It is much easier to use a staff than a flail, the nunchuck. Bruce Lee makes it look easy, and it's not that easy. Okay, if there's any more questions and feedback, Dolphus, best monk subclass. What are you asking me what the best monk subclass is? Personally, I think that you'll find, I don't think there is one. It really depends on what you're doing with your monk. And I'm trying really hard on my channel to not make the best and worst classes videos. I know every other channel is making the best and worst classes, or best and worst of this and best and worst of that, and there's lots of other channels that can tell you about that sort of thing. I think it's personal preference, because, you know, you've essentially got the Sun Soul Monk, which is like the laser monk. You've got a few options available to you, way of the open hand. So yeah, I prefer to keep things reasonably sort of normalish, but that's just because I never really got into the idea of using magic and martial arts. It was never held anything for me. And I know that sounds strange, because I also love playing wizards, but that's just my way of seeing it. What's that, Paul? Depends on what your favorite enemy is. Yeah, well, it just depends on your preference. I don't really think there is a best. The only one that I am disappointed by, the only class that I still find a little bit frustrating, is the Drunken Master. That class is, I wouldn't say it's the worst. It's just, I just don't know how I would make it work in the game without it hamstringing me quite a lot. Because I feel like it's so situational, and it would be very easy to put myself in a bad situation to use all the features and wind up getting my my proverbial backside handed to me. So I love the concept behind the Drunken Master, I just don't like it as such. Okay, I think we've covered everything. I'm going to take off if everybody's got nothing else to say before this video gets really long, when I wasn't actually really planning to do that. I was trying to make it pretty quick and succinct. Now, for any of you who are wondering, Fred, where is the pre-made character sheet for this character, this monk, so I can check your numbers? There is not one. As I said, the monk, I've just taken 2 ability scores. Dexterity 16, strength 14. Okay, modifiers, one is a +3, one is a +2. That's all we needed to do this demonstration. We did not need to have a complete pre-made character sheet to make it work. Otherwise, I'd feel like people get confused by too much other maths on the page, and I don't want you going and looking at the page for maths that does not exist. Okay. All right. I'm going to take off before I lose my voice, which is probably going to happen very shortly. You guys all have a good day, good night. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, and I'll see you later.